Good morning. I had to run to town, take my wife some mocha frappe, and drop my son off to karate and the neighbor kid. And I got a cold, and my wife's concerned I might have COVID because of my symptoms. I was up all night coughing. I wasn't up all night, but I was up quite a while coughing. I had to leave the room and go to a different room so I wouldn't keep her awake. So she had me get a COVID test. Not that it really matters. I mean, all that's going to do is tell me whether or not I should be hanging out around other people very much. To me, it's just another cold. Statistically, it's just another cold. It's a bad cold. But I don't want to get in that whole debate. I'm really sick of that whole thing. I saw recently that Epic Times did a report on COVID lawsuits. I guess a bunch of nurses in Illinois got like a $10 million settlement because they were fired from their jobs because they refused to get the shot. And they were fired, which is unconstitutional. So they got their back pay, and I guess they could get reinstated to their jobs or whatever. Supreme Court denied seeing it because it pretty much consistently across the board, states have been ruling in favor of constitutional rights. So that's good, but they've kind of left it open that it could happen again. So that's not so good. I was watching a news clip, or it was actually a doctor online. He was given some report about L-glutamine and who should be taking it and who shouldn't, and how they should be taking it. And someone in the comments was complaining that their personal doctor had told them that it wasn't necessary for them to, or that it was necessary for them to take it with food, and this doctor was saying they didn't need to take it with food. So they were stating that you shouldn't pay attention to the doctors that are online. Well, I've got the opposite testimony on that. I've gone to multiple doctors over decades and been prescribed things I didn't need for diagnosis that I didn't have on multiple occasions. And with GERD, I ended up having to cure myself. They never did figure out the cure. They had me on antacids for like 15 years. And I finally figured out through my own study and research that if I just took apple cider vinegar a couple of times a day with some water, it fixed it. Sure enough, it did. It fixed my GERD. Now, it didn't fix all my digestive problems, but there again, my doctors, I keep going to different doctors trying to get them to figure out what the problem is with my symptoms. And despite my blood work changing over time, they're not catching it. They're not doing anything about it. I'm still going through that right now. But I'm learning from my own research that more than likely it's probably caused by an imbalance in my thiamine and possibly other things, magnesium and zinc and other things that I'm deficient in. Kind of lines up with all the symptoms I'm having, the signs that I have in my blood work. And they're not putting the pieces together. And I'm having to take it to them repeatedly and kind of point this out and point that out. And I'm like, well, this doesn't make any sense. And they just blow it off. It's annoying. It's frustrating. And I need people to understand. I've done enough research and I've had enough experience and I've worked in the medical field long enough and seen enough doctors to tell you that they're just people. Okay, they're just people like you and me, And they deserve respect for their education or whatever they've gotten. But have you been to college lately? College lately is much more about indoctrination than it is education in many cases. Now, it's really up to the student what they get out of it, but based on what I've seen, it's a lot of indoctrination and a little bit of education. Education that you could probably get yourself if you picked up a book on a regular basis and read, looked at different studies. So I'm making a video about this because it's important, and I have a lot of experience personally with it and a lot of knowledge from my own research and time working with a multitude of doctors. Okay, some of them are good, some of them are legitimate, good practicing physicians, but a lot of them just they're Google doctors is what I call them. You know, they bash you for looking up your symptoms online, but when you go in to see them, they basically tell you the same stuff you could look up yourself, and they throw you some generic prescription, and it's a cookie cutter treatment. Well, I have news for you. You can treat one person with the same thing, and another person. You can treat two people the same thing for the same symptoms. You can kill one of them and cure the other. If you don't know what you're doing and you're not really particular, each individual is an individual. We all, the human body is a very complex system, and there's a lot that goes into it that doctors can't even explain fully. So this is a very long roundabout way to get to this point, which is really the point. All good comes from God. This is not just about physical stuff. This is spiritual as much as it is physical. And God allows things to happen for a reason. Your health problems, your healings, all these things happen for a reason, and self-included. I would suggest, based on personal experience, that if you're having problems and you're not getting solutions, it's probably due to pride. Because here's the deal. Whether it's you that figures out what the problem is or the doctor that figures out what the problem is, ultimately it's God that allowed that to happen. And if you don't figure out what the problem is, and the doctor doesn't figure out what the problem is, and you're suffering through it, there's probably a good reason for it that you don't understand. And you should probably talk to God about that and figure that out. I think in a lot of cases it's because people aren't paying attention. And I know, and I say that's, I'm projecting because it's been my experience from myself. So I take things for granted. I was listening to a bishop yesterday give this talk, and he was talking about it from a completely different perspective. But it applies to everybody, including the bishop himself, which he himself acknowledged. We are in a continual spiritual warfare that a lot of people just don't pay attention to. They tune it out. You think you're going to live forever. You think you're going to live like this your entire life, and that's just the way it is. And then, yeah, you die, but that's someday, not now. And you're going to, when you die, you're going to go to heaven, and it'll be like this, but better, right? That's what most people think, from what I hear, from what I observe. That's not really Orthodox Christian teaching. People, and this is my point, people don't, they make assumptions, and they jump to conclusions, and they make their own interpretations, and they don't really dig deep and spend a lot of serious effort on figuring this stuff out and getting in touch with God in their heart and learning. You can't just read books and become a saint, a theologian. You can't just read books and become a carpenter or a rocket scientist or a firefighter or a healer. You have to have experience, and it's not just a mental or physical experience, it's also spiritual. So if you're not paying attention to God, where all good comes from, and you're achieving some success, then you're probably going to take credit for that and be prideful, which is what the devil did. He took credit for his beauty and abilities, and he thought he was God. So that didn't work out too well for him. We don't want to imitate that, because that's exactly what we're doing when we do that. Now, if you figure things out through prayer and asking God's help, and whether it's you figuring it out, or a doctor, or someone else, sometimes it's just some random person that says, well, hey, I know what the problem there is, and because I've dealt with that, and then you get the solution. Regardless of where it comes from, it's from God. If you ask God for it, He gives it to you, that you glorify God. Now, sometimes that happens without you asking, but there again, it's God granting it. It's not just random happenstance or luck. I don't understand people that believe in luck. My father used to get on to me for that, because I used to talk the same way. But yeah, luck's not a thing. He decides everything. He pretty much allows nature the laws of nature, the way He set it up to take their course. But He can change the rules at any time. He created everything, including the rules. So, yeah, of course, a scientist who's an atheist is not going to go along with that, and they're going to say that I'm delusional. But there's a lot more evidence of orthodoxy being true, scientifically speaking, than there is for the atheist model. And in whichever case you take, you're basing it on faith, because you really can't prove it. You can't prove it. But logically, the Christian model makes more sense, common sense. And there's a lot more evidence of it, intelligence in nature. It's not there's a design that's not just happenstance. It's just, there are people out there that's much more eloquent that can say, I'm just a lay person. But I've listened to all sides of the argument, and I'm an Orthodox Christian. So, wasn't always, but I am now. So yeah, each person in the profession, don't trust your doctors, don't trust your internet gurus, your internet doctors or whatever, and don't put too much trust in yourself. You really can't trust anybody except for God. That's really it. That's what it boils down to. And humility will teach you what you need. I mean, God will teach you if you ask Him and you look in yourself and see what's going on. I have a fairly decent idea of why I'm suffering, the health problems I'm suffering, because when I analyze what I've done and been through in my life and the choices I've made, and I can see I've damaged myself, and I can see that other people have damaged me, and I can see that I've damaged other people, and that we're all in this together. It doesn't do a whole lot of good to get too high on your horse. You have to defend yourself, and you have to be your own advocate. You have to do your own research, and hopefully you surround yourself with people who love you and who are intelligent and can pick up where you leave off, because there will come a time where you won't be able to make your own decisions, and you won't be able to help yourself, and someone else is going to have to help you, or you're going to have to suffer through it. I can tell you from experience that I have been going through recently There will be times where you are suffering and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Nothing. You just have to sit there and take it. And that's very difficult. Now, God, I'm grateful to God for giving me a lot of experience in suffering, in doing my jobs, or, whatever, growing up. Part of it, a lot of it has to do with my aggressive nature. I tend to be an aggressive go-getter, foolish person. You're going to be foolish, the old saying goes. You better be smart or tough. Because you're not smart, you're going to need to be tough. That's a fact. And you can be both. You can be tough and smart and foolish, or you can be all of the above. I've done all the above at times. Don't rely on your smarts, though, because they won't stay there permanently. Especially if you do foolish things like I have, your brain will get damaged, and you will lose some of those abilities, especially as you age, just naturally. You don't have to if you take good care of yourself and God grants you grace. One of my favorite stories in the Bible was one of King David's generals was like in his 80s, I think, and he was still in hardcore combat. He could still whoop 20-year-olds. Yeah, it's possible. God grants it. So, I don't know. There's lots of examples in the lives of the saints. I wanted to say that. We're not supposed to be apathetic and just like let go and put all our faith in God and doctors and people around us and just say, okay, well, whatever happens. That's not biblical. That's not. Yes, we put all our faith in God, but that doesn't mean we don't have to make some efforts and do our part too. I want to make that clear because I've heard that several times from certain people. And then there's people that are naysayers, like, well, you can't trust anything you read because it's all man-made and all that. Well, okay. Look at it like science. Yes, you can't trust everything that's said just because it's popular, or authoritative. For example, the authorities and the greatest minds used to argue that the world was flat, or that the sun revolved around the earth instead of the earth around the sun. And it was like you were shunned or persecuted, or could even be put to death for witchcraft for some of the stuff by the authorities and the greatest minds of the times. Well, things haven't really changed all that much. We just have more technology. There's technology today that they didn't have back then, and there's technology back then that we can't replicate today because people don't know how they did it. So understand reality. And there's so many people that just don't understand that basic reality. And there's a lot of things I don't understand. I don't mean to be talking like I know better, but man, there's a lot of people that don't. And you gotta have to take some responsibility and get multiple perspectives, use some common sense, but ultimately you need to have that spiritual connection with God and focus on that, and then everything else will fall in place. That doesn't mean you're not going to die. That doesn't mean you're not going to get sick, but it'll have meaning. There'll be a purpose for it, and it'll be a good purpose, a godly purpose. When you don't have that, all that negative stuff that happens to you is just bad. It's just bad. It's negative. There's nothing good redeeming about it. And usually you have like despair or negative attitude, or you're hateful or resentful, or that doesn't help. It doesn't help you or anybody around you. It's hard not to complain when things aren't going right sometimes, and it's hard not to argue with people that are just being extremely difficult and short-sighted. That's frustrating. I get it. But, I think from personal experience, I think it's a lesson in humility. And allowing God's will to be done. You try to help the people if you can get through to them in some way that touches their heart, usually through gentle correction. Sometimes it's a smack upside the head, but most of the time it's gentle correction. You definitely need to defend yourself and your boundaries, or you'll get walked on and killed. But moderation in all things, and glory to God for everything that's good. Yeah, it's a ramble that could go on indefinitely, because it's something that it touches every aspect of our lives. But there's definitely an internal aspect to all the things that we're dealing with on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. And you have to talk to God, maybe not always outwardly or verbally out loud, although that's good to do too with the lives of this, the writings of the saints in church. But a lot of times it's just internal, kind of a internal conversation, choices being made, thoughts popping into your head. You can't control thoughts pop into your head. I saw a thing, some guy was wanting to do polygraph tests for anybody doing childcare if they ever had inappropriate thoughts about children sexually. And what was the other question? The other question was a better one. It was more legitimate. I can't remember what the other question was. It was the more legitimate question. But the first question, the one about have you ever had inappropriate thoughts about children, I'm not saying that it's okay. It's definitely not okay. But demons put thoughts into your head. The question is whether or not you're going to entertain them and accept them. And so if I was given a polygraph test on something like that, that would be my answer. It wouldn't be a yes or no, because if you start tripping yourself, well, if I say yes, then that's not really accurate, because I've had the thoughts, but I haven't wanted to think that. I didn't want to think about those things, but that shit's all in your face all the time, everywhere. On the other hand, if I say no, well, I have had those thoughts pop into my head though, but I didn't dwell on them. So these, I rejected them and prayed, Lord have mercy. These are the kinds of things that people do on a daily basis throughout the day, and that's just one example. It could be anything, cheating on your wife, or stealing, or having negative thoughts about the government, or whatever, beating the crap out of somebody or killing somebody. These thoughts will pop into your head. That does not mean that you're going to choose them. That does not mean they're your thoughts. And people who don't believe in evil set themselves up for some serious psychosis. And if you aren't aware of that struggle that's going on within you, and you aren't protecting yourself, at least trying to some degree with prayer and reading the saints, the lives of the saints, and all the instructions they have on these things, you're at a great disadvantage, and you suffer a great deal. I've suffered a lot. A lot of people I care about have suffered a lot, and I see it in society every day in the news and on these videos. So, all right, I'm rambling horribly, and I apologize for that. But this is really important stuff. I mean, this is like the kernel core of our existence and how healthy we are, and properly understanding authority and their place. They have authority over us as much as we allow that's appropriate. But we don't. You got to be careful about treating doctors and authorities like idols, like gods, because they're just people like us that are educated, and they make mistakes just like everybody else, and they only do good when God grants it, whether they ask for it or not. So, all right, I've hammered that to death. Pray for me, a sinner. God bless. Over and out.